The Whispers of Blackthorn Asylum. Blackthorn Asylum had been abandoned for over 50 years. Once a place of treatment for the criminally insane, it now stood as a crumbling relic of its dark past. Locals avoided it, claiming the building was cursed. They spoke of screams echoing from its empty halls, shadowy figures peering from its broken windows, and a feeling of dread that clung to anyone who came near. But for urban explorer Mia Carter, the asylum was the ultimate challenge. She'd explored dozens of abandoned places, but Blackthorn was different. It called to her, as if it had been waiting. Armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a sense of adventure, Mia broke in through a rusted side door one stormy night. The inside was worse than she'd imagined. The walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti, the floors littered with broken furniture and shattered glass. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something metallic, like blood. Mia's flashlight flickered as she moved deeper into the asylum, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found herself in a long hallway lined with patient rooms. The doors were all closed, their small barred windows dark. As she walked, she noticed something strange. The doors were slightly ajar, as if someone or something had recently opened them. She pushed one open and stepped inside. The room was small and empty, save for a rusted bed frame and a single chair. On the wall, someone had scrawled words in what looked like dried blood. "They're still here." Mia's heart raced, but she told herself it was just a prank. She continued exploring, documenting everything with her camera. But the deeper she went, the more uneasy she felt. She began to hear whispers, faint, indistinct voices that seemed to come from all around her. She tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, more urgent. Then she saw it. At the end of the hallway stood a figure. It was tall and thin, its body twisted and hunched. Its skin was pale and cracked, like old porcelain, and its eyes were black voids. It didn't move. It just stared at her. Mia froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The figure tilted its head, its mouth stretching into a grotesque grin. Then it began to move toward her, its limbs jerking unnaturally with each step. Mia turned and ran, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. The whispers grew into screams, and the doors along the hallway began to slam open and shut. Shadows darted across the walls, and she could feel something chasing her, something cold and relentless. She finally reached the exit and burst outside, gasping for air. She didn't stop running until she was back in her car. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The asylum stood silent and dark, its windows like empty eyes staring back at her. When Mia got home, she uploaded the photos from her camera. Most of them were blurry or overexposed, but one stood out. It was a selfie she'd taken in one of the patient rooms. In the background, just behind her, was the figure, its hollow eyes staring directly into the lens. Mia tried to convince herself it was a trick of the light. A figment of her imagination, Emily approached cautiously, her hand resting on her radio. As she stepped closer, the symbols began to glow brighter, and a low hum filled the air. She felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. She turned to leave, but the path behind her was gone. The trees had closed in, forming an impenetrable wall. Panicking, she tried to call for help on her radio, but all she heard was a static. Then a voice came through, a distorted, guttural whisper that sent chills down her spine. "You shouldn't have come here." Emily spun around and her blood turned to ice. The archway was no longer empty. A figure stood beneath it, tall and cloaked in shadows. Its face was featureless, save for two glowing, white eyes that seemed to pierce through her soul. It raised a hand, and Emily felt an invisible force pull her toward it. She fought with all her strength, but it was no use. The figure's voice echoed in her mind. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The last thing Emily saw was the archway glowing brighter, as if opening to another world. Then everything went black. When Emily didn't return, a search team was sent to find her. They discovered her backpack and radio near the Blackfoot Ridge Trail, but there was no sign of her. The trail was permanently closed after that, but locals say if you hike there at night, you can still hear her voice on the wind, whispering a warning, stay away. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, you might see the archway glowing in the distance, and the figure waiting beneath it. What do you think? Write it in the comments.